All right. Great talk from Rob, sort of setting up this idea of platform and the architecture. What I want to do is talk about that from a security perspective. And for those of you just joining, my name is Travis Spencer. I'm the CEO and founder of Nordic APIs and Tubo Technologies. Tubo Technologies, for those of you who don't know, is an API security company. We work exclusively on API security, helping our organizations and customers implement architectures like the one I'm going to talk to you about today. So what I want to do is, in line with the theme of the event, is take that long view of what does it take to actually build a platform on which we can securely provide information and access to data, not just now, not just in 2 years, but in a much, much longer time frame. So we want to start by imagining what the future could look like. And right now is 2016, the year's pretty much over, it's 2017, and a decade from now is 2027, so we'll just round it up, and what does it look like in 2030? So we'll sort of imagine what it could be like, and I mean, that's around 5,000 days from now. And I don't know if you guys ever saw that TED Talk of the web in the next 5,000 days. That was about a decade ago, and we're living in that now. And so those predictions are coming true. I'm not saying that all the predictions that I'm going to make are coming true, but if you ever saw that TED Talk back in the 2007 timeframe, you were just like, this is not possible. These things can't really happen. And now we're living in it. So we can safely say, no matter what we see in the crystal ball, it's going to be hard to believe, but these things are going to happen. So let's look at that. And in case you have to jump out for a call or your phone rings or something, I'll tell you already, the #1 impediment to that future is digital identity. How do we recognize who people are in this increasingly complex, connected world? The way in which we are going to be able to overcome that impediment is by building on open standards. And we'll talk about what standards those are, how to get started, and how to prepare and evolve for change. And then we will talk about actually applying those standards, because what is a standard? It's a super long PDF that you don't really want to read. How do you actually implement this and do something in the real world with it? And then finally, we'll look at the impact of the IoT, because IoT is not hype. It's everywhere. It's already in the room. And so we want to talk about what the impact of that's going to be on the architecture, because we need to scale this for decades. So let's start by looking into that crystal ball. Already today, there are projects in place where highways are being created, designed, planned, where the only thing that can drive on them is driverless cars. So these are made for automated vehicles where we're going to put our trust and confidence into these machines to actually get us around and to allow them to drive in these spaces. We saw some drones here yesterday. We're going to see some right after my talk, actually. You can win one at the Tubo booth. Drones are becoming more and more a part of our lives, whereas just a couple of years ago, they were maybe some nerdy hobby groups were looking at them, and before that, military. But now they're becoming more involved in our lives, and that's going to increase drastically. You could imagine a drone being used to scan large forests for infrared signatures and looking for the start of a wildfire. Get in there, stomp that out very quickly. That's an easy, obvious application of drones. Not sure if it's a good thing, because wildfires can be helpful, right? But they can also destroy private property. And so we could use a drone to actually protect and ensure that that sort of thing doesn't happen. A couple of years ago, at Internet Dagana, Nordic APIs was there, and we had a design company presenting about how they were doing things with APIs and social, and how it was interacting with clothing and actually lighting up depending on who was saying what on Twitter. And this almost seems silly and passé now, but if you combine this idea of drones around there, think of the impact of someone strolling out on the catwalk and all these little drones are flying around this fashion statement. That would get lots and lots of buzz, and that would be quite easy to make of all those micro drones, I think, within the next few years. And it wouldn't just be for fashion. There's a lot of people here in the audience who are working in the medical industry. Those devices are going to be so small that they could actually be inside of our body by 2030, producing healings and cures for ailments, and even producing drugs for entertainment, perhaps for some people. So drones, but also taking a bigger picture and looking at space tourism. One of the channels on YouTube I like to subscribe to is Blue Origin, and they're actually making space tourism possible for everyday people. By 2030, we could be able to buy a ticket and go and experience weightlessness. We could go and be able to stay at a hotel in outer space. Wouldn't that be absolutely amazing? I wouldn't have thought the things in 2017 that I saw in that 5,000 days from now on the web could happen, but now they're happening. We're living them. We could actually be in 5,000 days going to space. I know I would buy a ticket if I could possibly afford it. 3D printing. We've seen some of this already, but think about that in construction applications and actually printing a house, printing a wall, printing a building, and maybe not just on Earth, but in outer space. Maybe it's even easier to print an entire habitat on Mars than it is to take all of the materials there through a rocket. So 3D printing, and not just in construction, but in food preparation. I've heard some people say that most restaurants will use 3D printing in food preparation in some respect by around 2030. Electric voting is something that we could be seeing a lot of by then. We have a long distance to go. I know as an American living abroad, it's quite hard to register to vote. But it's something that we need to do because we're all moving around and shifting in places where we live. So we need to do this in a secure way so that we can cast our ballots and still have some anonymity and not have to send it via email like I had to this year and give up my rights to secrecy and let everyone know exactly how I would like to vote. So we need to make improvements, and I think by 2030 we'll be doing that. There will be entire companies, maybe half of the large organizations that some of us work for today and our household names today will completely be gone. They'll be bankrupt or their industry will be vanished. And in addition to that, as the industries leave, jobs will leave. They'll be reinvented. That will cause us to have to come up with new ways of educating people. I've heard it said that by around 2030, about 1 in 5 jobs will require programming as a basic skill. That stuff that Audrey was talking about yesterday of actually helping youngsters learn to program, this is so, so important. Tell your children, doesn't matter if they're gonna be a ballerina, a firefighter, or whatever, they gotta learn to program. That's a basic requirement that we're all gonna have by 2030. And I think we owe it all to ourselves to learn some code if we don't already know it, and also owe it to our children to teach them that. And this is also going to affect not only the educational system, but the political system, religious systems, and causing some of those things to be questioned as we're starting to have all of these little devices in our bodies and around us and things like that. So a lot of this might sound like total hogwash, and that's okay. Predictions are always wild and crazy, but one thing I think you can count on, and I think you can probably agree with, is that we're going to see a lot more devices. Devices are going to be everywhere. We were just 10,000 or 5,000 days ago when we had like dumb phones. And by 2030, the devices that we have, these very fancy iPhones and Android phones and Windows, they're gonna look like rocks. I mean, they're gonna look like basic, archaic, silly things. So we can count on more devices in our lives in all sorts of new shapes and sizes. And the thing that we're trying to do in all of this is that's going to impede all of this is relationships, identity, as I said in the introduction. It's very easy for us. I mean, that's been one of my favorite things about the show so far is I recognize many of you, and I'm starting to learn your names, even if I've had to ask 5 or 10 times. We're doing business together outside of this event, and I'm seeing you on a more regular basis, and we're building a relationship. And that's normal for us human beings. It's in our nature to actually want to have relationship with people. The moment a baby is born, just seconds later, it recognizes its mother. It's within us to do this. It's not within a computer to do that. A computer understands 2 things, a 0 and a 1. And we teach it everything else on top of that. We build circuits, we build programming languages, we build compilers that can turn programming languages into a 0 and a 1. So then with that programming language, we can start to make complicated things, but in the end, a computer is fundamentally idiotic and stupid. It understands a 0 and a 1. So how do we get it to understand this complicated thing of identity and relationships, which are going to be necessary? Think about like in the Internet of Things, if you have a skier And you could have like a Iron Man type display on the goggles, right? That's not a big leap to understand that or to create that. And if you had such goggles as you're skiing, if you see like, 3 seconds from now or 0.3 seconds from now, you're in first place. You might push really hard, like I can just go faster and I'll be in first place. And someone might actually be hacking those goggles and telling you wrong information, and you might take that jump too fast and crash. So as we have the Internet of Things, what we need to be very aware of is security and know who's talking to those goggles. In the same way as we are learning and doing naturally here of building relationships. Identity is an important part of connecting these systems. So these paradigm shifts like we're talking about with Internet of Things, so many devices and so much cloud that it sort of comes down on us like a fog, social, big data, all these different aspects of computing that are impacting our lives, we need to know who it is that we're talking to, who's on the other end of that API. And it's a hard problem because of the fundamental idiocy or simplicity of computers. So the way in which we do that is by using standards. We need to connect these computer systems using open standards that are defined, using best practices, and open international recognized standards. And we call the stack on which you should build the Neo security stack. So for delegated access, we have OAuth 2. For federation, we have OpenID Connect. For identities, we have the JSON Identity Suite. For authentication, we have U2F and Web Crypto. And for authorization, we have Alpha. These standards give us a good building block and a foundation to base our platforms upon so that we can have a secure access to information and make sure those goggles aren't intercepted and giving the wrong information and other such applications as those. Like all good computer scientists and software engineers, to understand these very, very big problems, the way we were taught to do that is to break it down. I think it's just natural as people. We can't cope with that, so we make it into smaller and smaller chunks until we can cope with it. The first way in which we need to break this problem apart is into 3 separate subsystems. We need to take these open standards and we need to build an API management system like Rob was talking about. We need to have an identity management system and an entitlement management system. These 3 fundamental systems should be recognizable within all of your organizations and clearly defined with groups owning them, supporting them, working on them. And all of those different systems should be integrated, not with your own APIs, not with your own standards, not with things that you come up with, but with international standards that are widely deployed for which you can implement those standards or buy products that do. The identity management system's main job is to figure out who you are. The answer to that question could vary depending on what you're doing. You might actually want anonymous identity. You might want a very secure identity. In different cases, the identity management system should come up with different answers. But this entire system should provide that fundamental understanding of who it is that's talking on the other end of the API, on the other end of the wire. The other subsystems will use this answer in doing their jobs to provide access to data, to see if you're entitled or authorized to actually have that data. But the identity management system itself is the one that will come up with the answer. To break this system apart into smaller pieces, you should recognize 4 components in your security architecture, and that is a user management service. And this user management service is providing more or less CRUD, create, read, update, and delete, of user accounts, of groups, of connections between users and groups. And that user management system, as I said before, should be connected via an open standard. So that user management system should talk SCIM. SCIM is called System for Cross-Domain Identity Management. It's a standard from the IETF, and that will provide you with an API that you can use to create users, add users to groups, this sort of thing. Another very important component in your identity management system is a federation service. A federation service is a component that will take the answer of who you are in one security domain and let you reuse the answer to that question in another domain, another trusted domain. It is the one that's actually brokering or passing along that information in a cryptographically secure way. And then we have a security token service. The security token service's job is to issue a credential, a security token. And it's kind of like this. When you got a passport, which you may have needed to get here today, you had to go to the post office or the police station or wherever and show a birth certificate. And after you did that, the birth certificate was able to be used to get you a passport. So you went from one credential, a birth certificate, to another credential, a passport. The security token service does the same sort of thing. Given one sort of credential that doesn't let you go very many places, a birth certificate, you can get a more widely accepted credential, a passport, that lets you go even to Sweden. And the security token service will implement standards like OAuth. And then the federation service, as I should have mentioned, uses OpenID Connect. So outside of the identity management system is all standards-based integrations. The authentication service is the other very important part of this identity management system, and the authentication service is doing things like login, figuring out who you are, collecting that very local credential like the birth certificate, and it's also providing a lot of other capabilities that are becoming very, very important, like self-service registration, account linking, single sign-on, and other such things. This is connecting into all sorts of different directories and repositories. Could be LDAP, could be SQL databases, NoSQL databases, and it also connects to other authentication providers that don't even have data sources, like that are generating one-time passwords and things like that. And the authentication service is also connecting to social networks and exterior identity providers and authentication providers, and all of this stuff behind the authentication service tends to be very specific to your organization, tends to be non-standard or older standards that tend to be more difficult to work with, and we open them up as these newer standards, these neo-security standards, hiding back a lot of the stuff we may have been doing that we're not particularly wanting to expose any further beyond this identity management system. Does that make sense? Mental note, if you have a question on that, you'll have time at the end. The next subsystem, as we broke that apart, was the API management system. So the API management system is checking to see, are you allowed to have access to data? And then if you are, it's giving that data to the caller. So the API management system's job is to ensure that you have access to the information that you're requesting. To do that, again, coming into the system is all standards-based. The first component within the system that we'll interact with is called the API Security Service. This is a sort of firewall or a way in which we can check, do you have a token issued from the identity management system that we trust? All APIs that are behind this will only trust and allow for calls that are made, that are secured with a token that comes from your organization's trusted security token service. The only way in is with a passport. If you haven't got a passport, go and get one. And the way in which you get one is to talk to the identity management system. So that API security service is sort of the first point in, at which you must have some form of identification. And then it will check also at that point, are you authorized? Are you allowed to make this call? Are you allowed to have access to this data? At least to a coarse grain. It doesn't have a lot of information about the resource at the database level or the cell level, but it has quite a bit of information and will make an authorization decision before even letting that request come in further to the network. The next place in which it will call is either directly to the APIs in many cases, but even sometimes to an API integration service that's sort of orchestrating and putting these things together into larger services. So the API integration service will receive another token, like Jakob talked about yesterday. It could be a separate token, it could be an internal token that's been converted, and then the message will flow through here, but will still maintain the identity of the caller. It could be many steps removed. So what you need to be sure of is that you are architecturally ready for change. So that these two questions of who you are and what you're allowed to do will not change in 2030. We'll still be wondering this, whether we're building drones that are in our body, around our body, that we're doing driverless cars, or we're doing ski goggles, or any of these wild and unpredictable things that we'll be doing at that time, these two questions will still be fundamental, because recognizing who it is that's trying to access your data and what they're allowed to do will still be required, if not even more so. So we need to make sure that we have an architecture that can answer those questions. And to prepare for that, we need to build on standards, as I've been talking about, and security standards, new security standards, so that we're not starting from a legacy point of view already. So those standards that I mentioned up there will evolve. If you've been to a Nordic APIs talk where I've been presenting, you've probably seen that slide before. But what you might not have noticed is that it's changing. Every so often there will be a new standard coming in, and this is bound to happen. It's not because I was wrong. It's not because I lied to you. It was that the world is changing and shifting, and we need to be prepared for those new standards and build in a way that we can add in standards so that new services can use those newer standards-based APIs, because they are going to change, they are going to evolve. And also, definitely, the products are going to change. And we're going to be able to swap products in and swap products out. And if we don't build in a loosely coupled way where the interfaces between these systems is governed by open standards, then it's going to be hard to replace those products. And then we're sort of over a barrel to the vendor. And instead, we need to make sure that the platform is open and based on standards that we can implement ourselves or get different replacement products for. So the platform won't be replaced by 2030. It'll probably be iterated over a few times and extended. So we need to make sure that security can evolve with the changing business, with the changing times and the changing world that we'll be living in at that time. So right now, what we're talking mostly about is internet-based communication, where the identity management system and figuring out who somebody is talking to APIs that are running on the internet. And the way in which it's doing that right now is mostly HTTP 1, but in the coming months and years, it will certainly be HTTP 2. And that's one of my challenges to you guys in this talk, is to begin deploying HTTP 2. It will make the entire internet a lot faster, and on that we need to have standards-based exchange of tokens using OAuth and OpenID Connect. And those tokens should also follow a standard when applicable, and that should be a JOT token, typically, a JSON Web Token. And that JSON Web Token is important because it creates a lower technical barrier. It's a lot easier to build a JSON parser than an XML parser, so we can integrate and use JSON Web Tokens in other languages like C and C++ and Lua and these lower level languages where we might not have an XML parser. But that's going to change, as I mentioned. The platform needs to evolve and be able to expand. As the identity management system connects to the Internet of Things, the actual protocol may no longer be HTTP2. In some cases where you have enough compute power, I think it probably still will be, but it could be other protocols like CoAP. Inside of that CoAP stream, though, will be an OAuth message, I think. And I think that OAuth 2 will probably be on the agenda in 2030 of this platform summit. Perhaps at that time we'll be talking about its replacement, but I do believe it will still be important. And within those OAuth messages, we should be in the very near future exchanging tokens that are not JSON Web Tokens, but that are binary tokens. And that will be important for compactness, and also because if we're already in a binary stream like with HTTP2, it makes sense to keep it in binary. So CWT is for CBOR Web Tokens, or CBOR Web Tokens, and CBOR is more or less JSON with a binary encoding. So it's the same message format, but it as a binary representation for compactness. And now I'd like to talk about some next steps to give you some ways of actually applying and using this. One thing that you should do is look at this reference architecture and say, how does this apply? Well, first of all, do I believe it? Because there's lots of candidate architectures in solving problems. Is this a good architecture? I do believe it is. It's the one we've used with all of our customers. Didn't matter industry, size, geography, it's applied. And so look at it, assess, is this the right architecture at all for us? If so, where and how would it apply to our organization? What components do we have? Where is the security token service? Where is the authentication service in our organization? What is the API security service for us? And then do that gap analysis of, okay, we don't actually have that component. Is that important to us? Is that not important to us? Look at those gaps and then figure out also what would be the impact of the API security service on the databases and the APIs. How is that going to change how you're securing them, how you're calling them, and the clients that you've already deployed. Also, as an application, look at piloting and deploying implementations. After you've done that gap analysis, actually, as quick as you can, start to make very small incremental steps toward this. So do a proof of concept, pilot it, get some customers using this, some users using this, and then assess and iterate. Go live with HTTP 2 is one of my recommendations for you in applications from this in your API security service. Your authentication service, your token service, your API security service should all be running HTTP 2 at this point. Also begin researching CBOR. Look into that. Also look into CBOR Web Tokens and think about how your API security service is going to need to evolve and be extended to support these IoT protocols. Here's some additional resources. If you go to nordicapis.com/API-insights/security, you'll find lots of videos, ebooks, blog posts that explain this stuff in great detail. There's also a lot of great comments on a lot of those blog posts and YouTube videos, so you guys can interact with other people in the community there, and you can also interact with us and the authors of those posts so that you can learn more in an interactive fashion even after the conference. Download some videos so you can watch on the plane home or the train home. Here's some links about going really deep into OAuth, microservices security, how to apply that in a microservices architecture so that your authentication and authorization don't end up mingling together all of your microservices, which we're trying to sort of avoid in this reboot of SOA. Also, there's a OAuth white paper at the Tubo booth. You can grab one of those. It's a few pages explaining how all of this works, and you can read that also on your way home. So in summary, the future is going to be incredibly amazing. It's going to have all sorts of new things that we are unable to even comprehend at this point. I think the biggest internet company in the world we probably don't even know the name of yet. And by 2030, we will be doing incredible things, but we need to prepare now. And the best way to prepare now from a security perspective is to build an identity management system on open standards by ensuring that there is a security token service as a recognizable component, there's an authentication service, a profile service, and a federation service. And as those standards change and evolve, you add new implementations, but you don't replace them. As an example of this, we had one customer who has built an identity management system on some of those standards that Rob was talking about. Previously, the WS Star specifications, they had hundreds and hundreds of web applications and are able to migrate and to begin leveraging these standards, neo-security standards that I talked about, like OpenID Connect and OAuth, without changing any of those web applications. That's the position you want to be in 2025 and in 2030, where you're adding and iterating and supporting newer standards rather than starting from scratch and say, now we have this great new thing we want to do with ski goggles. But it's just, no, we can do that because we just add CoAP support into our token server. So be prepared for change, overcome those by building on standards, and that will result in a future-proof API security platform. Thank you. Do we have any time for questions? Yeah, a little bit. Questions? Yep, Audrey's gonna prep the drone. So yesterday, because of network problems, she wasn't able to make it do a flip, and we all wanna see it do a flip. So she's gonna come up here and also show us some more about API streaming, which is very interesting. So grab a coffee and come back and hear this, but do you have any questions, or was that? Yeah. Okay, super.
Question here.
Yeah.
So I totally agree with you that identity is a key a key thing that we need to understand, you know, who people are when they communicate. But my question is, do you think that's sufficient? Do you think that in looking forward to 2030, we'll also need to think about what is communicating in addition to who, so that we can identify devices, software, and make sure that there hasn't been any identity theft that could cause a problem?
Sure. I mean, I talked about people, but I mean, the thing calling your API, whether that's a robot or something else.
Yeah.
It's an identity.
But do you consider that to be covered in the stuff that we already have? Okay,
yeah.
Good.
I mean, we'll evolve it, like I was saying, but we have a good start. Okay.
So this is a question more about the authorization part of this problem domain, and in many cases, authorization is dependent on context. It could be whether this identified user has the proper relationship with the resource or data or whatever. So could you comment a bit on that? Because this is a rather complex scheme. There have been many attempts, role-based access control, mandatory access control. So where do you see coming standards with respect to those problems?
Sure. So I didn't get it all into that third subsystem, the entitlement management system, but the way in which we should do it today is using attribute-based access control. So we should look at the name value pairs that represent the user, represent the resource, represent the action that's being done on that resource, and the context in which it's doing. What time of day is it? Is it snowing? Which sort of proxy route did you come in? And be able to arrive at an authorization decision of yes and no. And that should be done outside. Those policies should be outside of the service, applied within each of those microservices as a filter. And so then each of those microservices isn't in control of the authorization logic, but it's given to them from the outside. And if we do like that, we'll be able to evolve it. And I think what will happen is more and more people, as they remove authentication and identity from their applications, will start to remove authorization, and then that will cause much, much more people to be struggling with that, and I think the standards will be pushed, and I think they'll evolve quite a bit from what we have today.
Thank you. I think that's all we had time for.
Super.
Thank you, Travis.